Tonight's big story, recent changes to our drug laws are back in the spotlight, with new figures revealing the impact police discretion is having on cannabis prosecutions. Newshub has obtained data that shows little has changed since the 2019 edition of the Misuse of Drugs Act came into effect. Zane Small has this exclusive story.
30-year-old Shane Timothy Hedges spent 2 years behind bars on cannabis charges. Prison led him down a dark path.
I was deeply immersed inside in gangs and heavy drugs, and when I got out I developed a methamphetamine addiction.
He's clean now thanks to the Pūwhakamua rehab program. 48-year-old Joseph Mathieu Martin also spent time in prison. He was caught growing cannabis plants.
That criminal conviction hanging over me has stopped me from leaving the country and applying for certain jobs that I maybe wanted to do.
In 2019, the government changed the law to specify that police should consider a health approach over prosecution for illegal drug possession. The Justice Minister, Kerry Allen, told Newshub last week it led to a radical reduction in terms of how police treat cannabis possession. But new data obtained by Newshub shows since that 2019 law change, court action for cannabis possession has reduced, but still remains high. There have been 142 court proceedings in the first 7 months of this year. In 2020, New Zealanders voted against cannabis legalisation, but the New Zealand Drug Foundation says it's time to follow America's lead.
Starting with decriminalising cannabis, and it is also time to pardon those people.
Police have got discretion to prosecute. That's actually brought down the number of prosecutions for use and possession.
But Green MP Chloe Swarbrick says it shouldn't be a discretionary choice by police, and decriminalisation should be written into law.
It's definitely something that the government can do really easily to start to address some of the injustices of the war on drugs.
A war that's yet to display the radical reduction the Justice Minister spoke of. Zane Small, Newshub.
Joining me now to discuss this further is Drug Foundation Executive Director Sarah Helm. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. So only a very slight decrease in convictions for cannabis possession. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, look, at the moment the law is unclear. In a sense, we've given police discretion to decide whether or not to charge, but it's being inconsistently applied, and that is because essentially we have handed the decision-making over to police instead of making it clear. We know the majority of New Zealanders don't support criminalising possession of drugs, in particular cannabis, and yet we're continuing to criminalise hundreds, in fact thousands of New Zealanders every year.
And of course, one of the concerns was a disproportionate rate of Māori being convicted. Have you seen any big changes in that regard?
Unfortunately, we continue to see a disproportionate number of Māori. It's almost half of people who are convicted for low-level drug crimes of possession, and the same for possession of cannabis, which is really grossly unfair. The other weird anomaly is the way that it's applied geographically is different. So it depends on what region you're in. If you live in Auckland, Bay of Plenty, Hawke's Bay or Gisborne, you're much more likely to be charged for drug possession.
The US is making big moves here, pardoning people for possession convictions. This is your area of expertise, so how damaging can they be for people who want to move on in life?
Look, it's been really sad this week. We have been hearing from people whose lives have been upended by convictions and by the fear of convictions. Patients, people who cannot afford to buy medicinal cannabis from prescription because it costs hundreds of dollars every month. And also just ordinary New Zealanders whose lives have been thrown up in the air. They are living in fear, and it's really, really unfair. It's also incredibly disproportionate to the harm. So most New Zealanders have tried cannabis, about 80% of New Zealanders in fact, making actually in a sense all of us criminals. And then we're continuing to criminalise people, and it's just really quite unfair. And most New Zealanders will try it for a very short period of time, then give it away. It is a very disproportionate response to then convict somebody. The harm of the conviction is far greater than the harm of the use. And if indeed somebody has problematic use or an addiction, they need help. A conviction isn't helping them.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time this evening.